I never thought I'd be standing here telling this story. Not because I'm ashamed, but because some wounds cut so deep, it takes time to find the strength to speak them out loud. And yet here I am. Because silence only protects the wrong people. It started on what should have been a normal afternoon. I had gone over to my son's house. Something I did regularly to help out with the kids, bring food, or just be part of their lives. That day, though, there was a strange energy in the air. My daughter-in-law barely looked me in the eye. She muttered something under her breath about me tracking dirt into her home, even though I had wiped my shoes at the door like I always did. She had been picking at me for weeks, maybe months. Small, snide comments disguised as jokes, sideways glances that made me feel like I didn't belong in my own family. But I brushed it off. I told myself I was imagining things. I told myself, she's tired. It's the stress. Maybe she's just having a bad week. But that day, it wasn't just glances or whispers. Turned into something cruel. Violent even. She told me she had something to show me upstairs. Followed her. Maybe I was too trusting, but never in my wildest dreams did I expect what came next. She brought out clippers. Actual hair clippers. First I laughed, I thought it was a joke, some kind of weird prank. But then her face changed. She said, "You're filthy. Always bringing your filth into this house. You want to be part of this family. Start by looking clean." Before I could even process what she meant, she grabbed a fistful of my hair. And she shaved it. I wish I could tell you I fought back right away. That I stood up and walked out. But I froze. The buzzing of the clippers filled the room, louder than anything I've ever heard. My scalp burned, not just from the cold metal, but from the humiliation. I remember staring into her eyes, and there was nothing human there. Just contempt. She called me dirty, over and over like it was a chant, like it gave her some twisted power. And you know what? In that moment I started to believe her. That's the worst part. For a second I wondered if maybe I was disgusting, if maybe I was a burden to them. She broke something in me. Not just my dignity but my sense of place in my own family. My son walked in halfway through. He didn't stop her. He looked shocked, sure, but he didn't stop her. And maybe that hurt even more. The one person I raised, the one person who should have protected me, just stood there. When it was over, I stared at my reflection in the mirror. Raw scalp, eyes red with tears, and I didn't recognize myself. It wasn't just about hair. It was about being stripped of identity, of worth, of love. I walked out of that house like a ghost. Hello. And for days after, I didn't leave mine. I didn't want anyone to see me like that, to know what had happened. I was ashamed, not of what she did, but of how powerless I felt. I kept asking myself, how did it get this far? How did I let it get this far? But shame doesn't belong to the person who's been hurt. It belongs to the one who hurts others. And the more I sat with it, the more I realized. She wanted to break me. She wanted to erase me from that household, from their lives. She wanted to reduce me to nothing. She failed. Because something happened in the silence. In the stillness of those long, lonely days, I started to see things clearly. I started to remember every little moment she manipulated the truth, twisted my words, turned people against me. It was no longer just about what she did with those clippers. It was about what she'd been doing with her lies all along. And once I saw that clearly, I knew what I had to do next. You know, when something that terrible happens, people often ask, "Did you see it coming?" And the truth is, kind of. Not in the way you'd expect. It wasn't a thunderstorm rolling in that you could watch build up from the horizon. It was more like water slowly leaking through the ceiling. Quiet, barely noticeable. Until one day, the whole roof caves in. Looking back, the signs were there. They were just so subtle, so cleverly disguised as jokes or offhand remarks, that I didn't want to believe they meant anything. I didn't want to stir up trouble in my son's marriage. I told myself that being a good mother-in-law meant keeping the peace. But peace isn't real when it's built on your silence. When my son first brought her home, I welcomed her with open arms. I genuinely wanted to love her like a daughter. I bought her gifts, asked her opinion on family traditions, even included her in things we never extended to previous partners. Gave her space. Gave her time. But no matter how much I tried, it was never enough. If I offered help, she called it meddling. If I stayed quiet, she called it coldness. Every move I made was wrong. And yet I kept trying. 'Cause I love my son. Because I didn't want to be that mother-in-law. The one people gossip about. So I made excuses for her. When she rolled her eyes at me across the dinner table, I smiled through it. When she conveniently forgot to invite me to birthday parties or family outings, I told myself it was just an oversight. When she spoke to me in a tone more fit for a servant than a family member, I convinced myself it was stress or exhaustion, or her way of trying to assert independence. I wasn't oblivious. I saw what was happening. I just didn't want to believe it. But over time, the pattern became impossible to ignore. She started whispering things to my grandkids, little digs that chipped away at their view of me. Grandma's old-fashioned. Grandma doesn't understand how things work anymore. I heard my youngest grandchild repeat one of those lines once, not even knowing what it meant. That crushed me in a way I can't describe. Then came the more calculated moves. She'd start rumors among other relatives. I'd hear back that I had said things I never said, that I was trying to turn the family against her, that I was jealous of her place in my son's life. Jealous. Gave him life. I raised him. I stepped back so he could build his own. How is that jealousy? Still I held my tongue. For the sake of my son. For the sake of the children. I kept thinking, this will pass. She'll come around. But she didn't. It only escalated. Slowly, deliberately. Until I barely recognized the dynamic anymore. My son, my sweet, caring son, had started parroting her criticisms, echoing her tone. Like he was being trained to see me through her eyes. Not as a mother, but as an inconvenience. And do you know how lonely that feels? To be erased in slow motion. What made it worse is that no one really saw it. 'Cause she was smart about it. In front of others, she was all smiles. She called me Mom in public. She hugged me at family gatherings. To everyone else, she looked like the perfect daughter-in-law. But behind closed doors, it was a different story. Coldness, mockery, gaslighting. There was one moment, I'll never forget it. I brought over a handmade quilt I had worked on for weeks. A little gift for the new baby. I watched her unwrap it, glance at it and say, "Oh, that's quaint." And then she tucked it into a bag without another word. No thank you. No appreciation. Just dismissal. That wasn't just a comment on the quilt. That was a message. And still I didn't speak out. Because I wanted to be the bigger person. Because I thought if I just showed her love, eventually she'd reflect it back. But some people don't see kindness as a bridge. They see it as a weakness. And she used mine to tighten her grip. On my son, on the kids, on the narrative. I didn't just lose my place at the table. I lost my voice. Or at least I thought I did. But you can only bottle things up for so long before they start to crack. You can only pretend everything's okay for so long before something breaks. And after what she did to me that day, everything broke. Strange how sometimes the moment you break is also the moment you wake up. For me it came in silence. After she shaved my head and called me dirty. After I walked out of that house looking like a shell of myself. I went home and sat on the edge of my bed for what felt like hours. No tears at first. Just stillness. I didn't even take my coat off. Couldn't. It was like if I moved, the whole thing might hit me all at once, and I didn't think I could handle that. But eventually the tears came. Not loud, dramatic sobs. Quiet ones. The kind where your whole body just trembles because something inside you has been shattered. I wasn't just grieving what she did to me. I was grieving the role I had tried so hard to play. The mother who wanted to keep the family together. The grandmother who wanted to be loved. The woman who swallowed disrespect for the sake of peace. It was like all the pieces of who I had been, the versions of myself I'd bent and twisted to fit into that household, were suddenly scattered on the floor. And I thought to myself, is this what I've become? Someone so afraid of being seen as bitter or overbearing that I let someone reduce me to nothing. I couldn't believe how far it had gone. Not just that moment in the room, but every moment leading up to it. All the times I let her have the last word when I should have spoken up. All the family events I skipped just to avoid the tension. All the times I made myself small, silent, tolerable. The truth is, I had been breaking for a long time. That day just made it impossible to ignore. I didn't eat for 2 days. I couldn't look at myself in the mirror. It wasn't just about the hair, though every time I caught my reflection I flinched. It was about what it symbolized. It was about power, humiliation, control. She wanted me to feel like less. And I did. But only for a little while. 'Cause then something shifted. On the third morning I woke up and looked at myself. Really looked. There was no hair, sure, but there was still me. My eyes, my face, my history, my strength. And in that moment, I stopped seeing a victim and started seeing a survivor. Someone who had been pushed too far and had nothing left to lose. And do you know what happens when you have nothing left to lose? You stop pretending. You stop playing the game. You stop worrying about whether your voice is too loud or your truth too inconvenient. That's when I knew. I couldn't keep quiet anymore. But I also knew I couldn't just go shouting. I needed to be smart. I needed to be calm. I needed to be exact. Because the people who manipulate like she does, they count on one thing: your silence. And if you do speak, they hope you'll be so emotional, so broken that no one takes you seriously. I wasn't going to give her that. So I started putting things together. Memories, patterns, the way she twisted conversations, the lies she told others about what I said, things I never said. I started writing things down. Times, dates, moments I remembered clearly. I realized that while she was busy tearing me down, she had left a trail of her own mess behind. But even before all of that, before the confrontation and the unraveling of her lies, I had to face something much harder: myself. I had to admit that I let it happen for far too long. That I didn't trust my instincts. That I confused endurance with love, and silence with grace. And while that was painful, it was also freeing. Because you can't take back what happened, but you can decide how the story ends. So I made a decision. No more hiding. No more shrinking. I was done being afraid of how the truth would be received. I didn't need to scream it from the rooftops, but I needed to stop whispering it to myself. The moment I chose to stop protecting her at the expense of myself, that was the moment I started healing. It's amazing what you start to see when you finally stop looking away. Once I gave myself permission to feel the full weight of what she'd done, and more importantly, to stop making excuses for it, I began noticing the cracks in her perfect image. They were always there, I just hadn't let myself truly look. Maybe I didn't want to believe it. Maybe I was scared of what it would mean if I did. But once my eyes were open, there was no closing them again. I started thinking back, really thinking. Replaying conversations, moments, all those subtle manipulations she had used like a skilled puppeteer. She had a way of planting doubt in people's minds without ever sounding accusatory. It was always a gentle suggestion, a raised eyebrow, a half-finished sentence. I just worry about how involved she is in our life. I mean, don't you think it's a bit much? Those words, dressed up in concern, sowed seeds that turned people I loved against me without them even realizing it. I remembered one afternoon when she told my son I had scolded the children for something as simple as asking for a snack before dinner. He came to me afterwards saying I needed to ease up, that I was making them uncomfortable. I was stunned. Not because I hadn't said something, but because it had been a gentle, loving reminder. Something any grandparent would say. But by the time it reached his ears, it had turned into a lecture. Problem. And I was the villain. It was like that again and again. She didn't need to lie outright. She just twisted reality enough that the people around her started to question their own memories, their own judgment. Including me. She was so convincing, so careful. Until she wasn't. Because here's the thing about liars, they get comfortable. And when they do, they get sloppy. I started keeping notes, even if it felt ridiculous at first. A small notebook I tucked into a drawer. I'd write down things I remembered, what was said, who was there, what the outcome was. It helped me realize how often the pattern repeated. How much of her behavior wasn't accidental? It was strategy. Divide and isolate. Make me seem overbearing, emotional, unstable. Slowly wear away at the foundation of my relationships while keeping her hands clean. And it wasn't just with me. Once I started paying attention, I noticed the way she talked to others, too. The way she manipulated my son. How she always made herself the victim. If she snapped at him in front of us, she'd later say it was because she was exhausted, or that he had provoked her. If she skipped out on family obligations, it was always because someone had made her uncomfortable. There was always a reason, and that reason was always someone else. But the moment everything truly clicked for me was when I ran into an old friend of hers at the market. She recognized me, asked how the family was doing. And as we chatted, she hesitated, then said, "I always wondered what happened with her. We had a falling out a few years ago. It got messy." I gently pressed for more, and the story that came out, almost a mirror of mine. Lies, manipulation, isolation. This woman had been through it too, just in a different setting. And she wasn't the only one. It was like following a trail of breadcrumbs. Every step I took led me closer to the truth I had been too afraid to confront before. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a clash of personalities. This was a pattern. A person who knew how to craft stories and weaponize sympathy. Who used her charm as a shield and her words as knives. So I started speaking up. Gently at first, carefully. I mentioned little things to other family members. Tested the waters to see if they, too, had seen what I saw. And slowly things started shifting. One cousin said, "You know, I always felt like something was off." Another relative admitted they had felt pushed out but didn't want to seem dramatic. It was like the fog was lifting, not just for me, but for everyone she had tried to keep in the dark. And that's when I realized, I wasn't alone. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't imagining things. The lies she built around me were beginning to crumble, not because I screamed them down, but because I was steady. I was honest. I was no longer afraid to speak the truth, even if my voice shook. She underestimated me. She thought breaking me down would make me disappear. But it didn't. It made me sharper. Quieter maybe, but not weaker. Just more focused. And I wasn't going to stop until every lie was brought to the light. There comes a point when staying silent becomes more painful than speaking out. For me, that point came after I started realizing just how deep her lies went, and how many people had quietly suffered because of her just like I had. Once I saw the truth, once I had gathered the pieces, I couldn't pretend anymore. I couldn't keep tiptoeing around her manipulation, hoping things would magically fix themselves. Because they wouldn't. She counted on my silence, and she wore it like armor. And I decided I was going to take that armor off piece by piece. But let me be honest, it wasn't easy. Finding your voice after being pushed down for so long is not like flipping a switch. It took everything in me not to second-guess myself. I kept hearing that voice in my head saying, "What if they think you're bitter? What if they side with her? What if this just makes things worse?" And believe me, she had done her job well. By the time I was ready to speak, she had already painted me as the difficult one. The overly emotional mother-in-law who just couldn't let go. But I knew what was real. I had the memories, the timeline, the facts. And more than anything, I had my own integrity. That's something she couldn't touch. I started small. I chose a family gathering. A neutral space where everyone would be present, no excuses, no side conversations. I didn't make a scene. I didn't raise my voice. I simply spoke. Calmly, clearly, and with truth. I said, "There are things I've let slide for a long time. Things I kept quiet about, not because they weren't real, but because I thought keeping peace meant keeping pain to myself." You could have heard a pin drop. And then I told them what happened. Not just the haircut. Not just the insults. But everything. The years of passive aggression, the false stories, the manipulation, the lies that she used to isolate me. I laid it out like a puzzle finally assembled. And the picture was crystal clear. Some people looked shocked. Some looked uncomfortable. And some, I could tell, had already known on some level, even if they hadn't wanted to admit it. She tried to interrupt, of course. Tried to cry. tried to twist the story mid-sentence. But I didn't let her take the floor. Not this time. I looked her straight in the eye and said, "You've had your turn to speak for years. Now it's mine." That moment, it wasn't just powerful. It was liberating. Because for the first time in years, I felt like I had stepped back into myself. I wasn't the woman who sat in silence while being picked apart. I wasn't the background figure in my own life. I was standing up not just for what she did to me, but for every version of me that stayed quiet when I should have spoken. And it didn't end there. The truth has a way of rippling. Over the weeks that followed, more people started coming to me. Quietly at first. A cousin who'd stopped talking to me admitted she had believed something my daughter-in-law had told her. A lie that made me look cruel. A family friend said they'd always sensed something was off but didn't know how to approach it. My son, even he, slowly, began to see the pieces that hadn't made sense. He began to question the version of events he had been fed for so long. It didn't all fix itself overnight. Healing takes time. Trust takes time. But the shift had started, and once that door opened, it didn't close again. The most important part of all this wasn't just that I told the truth. It was that I chose to. Despite the fear. Despite the risk. I decided that no matter the outcome, I needed to reclaim my voice. I needed to stop letting someone else rewrite my story. It's funny how, once you speak up, you start to remember who you are. I had spent so long walking on eggshells, trying to be palatable, trying not to cause waves. But I'm not here to be palatable. I'm not here to be erased. I'm here to be real. And real doesn't always make people comfortable. But it sure as hell brings peace. So no, I didn't scream. I didn't fight. I didn't stoop to her level. I just told the truth. And when you've got truth on your side, you don't need anything else. There's a strange quiet that settles in after the storm passes. Not the kind of quiet that feels hollow or uncertain, but the kind that feels earned. Like you've been through something so intense, so exhausting, that silence becomes a kind of peace you didn't even know you needed. That's where I found myself after everything came out. After the lies were exposed, after people started to see the truth for what it was, there was a shift, not just around me but within me. Because what she never understood was that humiliation doesn't destroy you. It clarifies you. It strips away everything superficial, every illusion you were holding on to. And once you're left with only the truth, that's where your strength begins. People started seeing her for who she really was. Not because I made a scene, not because I waged some kind of war, but because truth has a way of standing on its own when you're brave enough to let it. She tried to explain it all away, of course. Tried to backtrack, twist, play the victim. But by then, the damage she'd done was undeniable. Her stories didn't line up anymore. Her charm wasn't fooling anyone. It wasn't just me saying it now. Others were speaking up too, connecting the dots, finally giving voice to the things they'd stayed quiet about. And what happens to people like her when they lose control? They unravel. Quietly at first, then quickly. One by one, the people she manipulated began to pull away. She lost her grip. Not just on me, but on the story she'd been spinning for years. The family started to rebuild itself without her as the center of attention. Her words no longer held weight. Her absence no longer felt threatening. But I wasn't sitting around watching it happen with glee. That's not who I am. I wasn't out for revenge. I didn't need to see her fall to feel whole again. What mattered to me wasn't what she lost. It was what I got back. My voice. My dignity. My relationships. My son began to come back to himself. At first, he didn't know what to say. How do you apologize for being blind to something so toxic, especially when it caused so much hurt? But I wasn't interested in making him feel guilty. I just wanted him to see the truth, and he did. Slowly, carefully, with the heartbreak of someone realizing they'd been living inside a lie. And that kind of realization, it changes people. We had hard conversations, ones we'd been avoiding for years. There were tears, awkward pauses, moments where I wasn't sure what would come next. But we pushed through. We rebuilt. Not perfectly. Not instantly. But honestly. My grandchildren started coming around more. Not because they were forced, not because of obligation, but because they wanted to. I cooked for them again, told them stories, played games. And little by little, the tension that had hung between us for so long began to lift. They saw me, not the version of me she had described, but me. And they laughed, and they listened, and they loved me right back. It's hard to explain what that kind of healing feels like. It's not loud or dramatic. Soft. Subtle. It's the quiet warmth of sitting at a table with people you love and realizing you don't have to prove yourself anymore. You just get to be. And somewhere in all of that, I found something I didn't expect to feel again. Joy. Not surface-level happiness. Not the forced smiles I'd worn for years. Real joy. The kind that comes from surviving something that was meant to break you, and realizing you're still standing. Stronger. Wiser. Free. She thought shaving my head would strip me of my pride. She thought calling me dirty would leave a mark I couldn't wash away. But what she didn't know is that the real dirt wasn't on me. It was in her lies. And when the truth came out, it didn't stain me. Cleansed everything. I walk into rooms now without shrinking. I speak without trembling. I live without needing anyone's permission to feel valid. And that, to me, is the greatest outcome of all. Because I didn't just get through it, I grew through it. Sometimes you don't need to win a battle. You just need to stop letting someone else fight it for you.